So let us return to answering questions. One of the questions that I got on my video, where I was talking about the similarities between different African countries, is I'd add Igbos too. As an Igbo myself, I do see similarities or connections to Congo. For those of you that don't remember, this was the image that I had. And in this image, I showed different types of females from across Africa, which showed intense similarities. Now, of course, things like genetics and stuff like that show even more evidence that Africa has been connected for a long time. And I've shown you how things hopped from one part of Africa to the next, how farming, iron smelting, and several different things went from one place to another. And so the similarities that I hear should be no surprise to anybody. Now, I'm glad that this person has commented that he sees the similarities himself. I would love if you would tell me some of the similarities. One of the hardest things to do is language. I always try to break down linguistically how they're connected. And I've seen it. I've literally heard words from West Africa where I go, that is absolutely a word that I recognize from the other place. And there's words that I've heard also from Afroasiatic, and there's words that I've heard from Central African languages, and there's others, and even language isolates. That's something that I still need to talk about. That Africa actually has some language isolates that some people have never heard of. They think every single language in Africa must be 100% connected, but this is not true in all cases. And in fact, we know that there were other species and, well, not species, but other human like people which were different than the typical Homo sapiens, and most of them represent a ghost species. And these people would have spoken a completely different language. The only thing that upset me, though, and this has been something that's been brewing for a long time, is the difference in reaction between the connections between different African nations, including Ethiopia, which I think Ethiopia is probably the most fascinating civilization, starting from like the first century AD till about the 1400s in the world. I think it's one of the least explored and the most documented place in the world that has just got no interest. People don't care. I don't even know how to approach it. When I start to approach Ethiopia, I always pull back because I think I don't know too much about the subject yet. Even when I try to list the kings, I always find myself in a position where I'm listing mythological kings. So these are kings that could have been real, but we don't know. And then I start listing the kings and I realize they don't belong to the same group. So, in other words, in some cases in Ethiopia, you have two kings that are around. Now, here's the thing that upsets me is that I see too many people being more excited by European connections. So, in other words, they're more excited that there's Africans in Europe than Africans in Africa doing fascinating things. And that is kind of a problem. And the reason is because, again, Eurocentrists have convinced people that the highest civilizations in the world are in Europe. And so Africans, and I mean every African from around the world, descendants of Africans from around the world, seem more impressed by things that happened elsewhere and that happened late in history as compared to the multiple things that happened in Africa that happened early. And then we have things like Domba Shaba that happened late, but are still as impressive as any other place. You know, we have damn near like phosphorus fire by using palm oil in Africa, which, by the way, phosphorus fire is what kind of led to people starting to explore other things, other ways of light. other than just the normal fire that you just put on oil and you just walk around with a lamp. It took the Egyptian African study of alchemy to try and discover that in Europe. By the way, that's another giant, long conversation. Alchemy and how it's connected to all other versions of African studies that have to do with chemistry and stuff like that. There's a connection. There's a reason why Africans had so many metals and were so obsessed with gold, not in the same way that Europeans were, where they were trying to use it as money, but Africans were obsessed with stuff like that. And then you go see alchemy also be a study of materials. You can imagine, and also I found a list, but I'm not going to show it here, a list of ways in which Africans used to separate these chemicals. And some of these come from dictionaries. Now, pertaining this specific image that is on the screen, you can see here the similar representation. And I'm not like a lot of people. I don't go and find things that other people have already found and then just repeat it. The things that I'm showing you are individual, and a lot of people have never even thought about it. For instance, take the woman in Egypt and compare that woman to the one in the middle, which is a South African woman, and you will notice the stuff on her head is similar as well. It is not just a small thing. Look at the. This is why I actually was trying to save this, because it's not a small thing like, oh, they're kind of painted white and they have braids, because that's not as profound a realization as some people would think. And also, I was going to make a video on the other side, but I think this is a great opportunity to talk about it on this video. But okay, so let's start from head to toe of these females that are on the screen. So you can notice there's stuff on her head. These accessories are typical in all of these cultures. So it's the reason why I'm showing you these things is it's to show that the hair is coarse. The hair can hold things up. The hair is structured. It's not smooth. It's not some flaky thing, no matter what you think they look like. And then you go down to the bottom. Everybody here has got jet black hair. That part is not even debatable. And then you see this band around their head. That band is everywhere in all of these images. Some are more elaborate than others, but I can promise you that if I showed you multiple from multiple different countries, you will see that there's a repetition. And not only is there a repetition, but this is the part that also I get annoyed by: the beads. Remember what I was saying about the beads. North Africa, by the way, I left out for a reason. I left out North Africa. You notice this: Central Africa, West Africa, South Africa, Egypt, but I didn't include the other parts of North Africa, but they qualify too. So notice the beading. You notice these triangles over there. If you look at the ancient Egyptian one too, you will notice that there's triangles in those areas. This is not a coincidence. This is almost like if you found, so you see the Japanese symbols today, right? If you found Japanese writing on somebody's forehead in Japan or Korea or China or Thailand or any of the East African or Southeast Asian or East Asian countries, and then you ask yourself, I wonder if all of these are connected. And the answer would be absolutely. But in Africa, and I do understand that Africa is a much bigger place, but in Africa, there's this thing where even if you find similar stuff, some people go, it must be a coincidence. Why is it always a coincidence? Is the real question. Another thing, and I've noticed in America, there were a lot of people doing this, putting beads and braids, which, by the way, in Africa, until they started copying America. You never did that unless you were a person who could do rituals, right? When you put the beads in the braids and then they join together, like that woman from Central Africa, you notice there, they do that in every other part of Africa as well, including Egypt. These beads and their different colors and all of that, they all have meaning. They're not small. If you go through the rituals, you will understand it. You can understand why I wouldn't know the meanings behind them because, of course, you have to go through the ritual ceremony, which, by the way, something that I've noticed, and I made this mistake as well. The ritual is the same way that going to school is a ritual. So it's not, and I've made this mistake before. It's not that it's forbidden for other people to go through. Anybody can take it, but you have to be able to pass it. If you can't pass it, you can't go through. That is not a secret society. That is not some whatever. What it is in real life is just a class. And if you can pass it, you can pass it. I wish we actually had photographs of ancient Egyptians because I swear they would have looked like this if they were doing their rituals. And remember how even the Greeks described them. Herodotus described them as doing extreme movements. So the females do these extreme movements, extreme stomping, and everything. And that goes well with the ancient African dances that are still around till today. But you know what's actually a bit weird is that the ancient Greeks and the Yemenites and all the other Asians, really, Asians, Greeks, Turks, those type of groups, they all have the same systematic dances and stuff like that. So it nothing should shock them when they come to Egypt, but everything shocked them when they came to Egypt. It's hard to explain sometimes when you're talking about something that is physical and real. So right now I'm not talking about whether their magic worked or not. What I'm talking about is their physical appearance and what they had on. You can see still with this head tie, you can see with the braids. The braids here are clearly more defined than before. The prayer hands that she has up, the color representing the gods, which can be in between white and yellow. And you can see with the other people as well that the colors also represent the gods. You can understand why in Egypt they would associate gold with gods. One of the reasons why I love art is because of how it can take something that is in your head and sort of solidify it. So if you look at this artistic rendering or this artistic depiction of an ancient Egyptian priestess, it almost comes to life. You can almost imagine any of these women, including the Egyptian, being in this exact scenario. Do the clothes not just look like a modified version of the other clothes? Also, notice how they have the general same. It's like a one piece that sort of looks like a two piece type dress because of the up down thing, which, you know, if you know anything about fashion, some of these things would be considered incorrect by today's day, but that's just what they did in the past. Now, incorrect meaning it's not up to the taste of the modern people. So, gone through these, and I've already mentioned in the previous video that the priestesses played a role in passing messages to the other side. But of course, if there's another side, then who is passing the messages backwards? Who is the person representing humans on the other side? And the answer is Hathor. Although Hathor represents the bovine, she also represents the sky, which, you know, the question is how can a cow deity represent the sky? She also represents the unlocking. So, in other words, the difference between this world and the next. And she also represents the two sides of Egypt. So we'll get into it. The first interesting thing is, I mean, some of these people kind of look like very similar. You can see that there's a certain image they're going for. And it's kind of funny how the two women on either side of Hathor are almost the spitting image of this 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 year old structure. Now, like these priestesses, I want you to consider what I'm about to say, because they always say this in the classes when they teach African religion, but I have to repeat it over and over again because sometimes it gets lost when you start talking about spirits and stuff. People start thinking I mean it in the Christian sense. No, in the literal sense, Hathor embodies a human being, a real human. So in Egypt, a real person would be considered Hathor. So someone walking around. And this might be in the form of a priestess, which we have seen some people take those positions. This might be in the version of an actual cow, a real one. So, designated to one person or not. And of course, because there is a multi element part to God's, an infinite element, it can be at multiple people at one time in the past. So, one of the questions that I had, obviously, is how does Hathor, the cow, relate to an African stool? Because African stools tend to be related to cattle, and then they tend to be related to the afterlife. So obviously, you can understand why the headrests would be related to the afterlife because they're used to go to sleep and you can see the sloping and all of that. But usually, this is associated with the back of a camel, the slope thing, back of a cow, not a camel, is associated with the back of a cow. And like the Asante or all of these people, the stool is associated with the afterlife. Now, how can a stool that you sit on be associated with the afterlife in many countries from around the world? Well, around Africa. So, let me give you a quick rundown of ancient Egyptian mythology. So, the sky god, this sloping thing is the sky god. The guy in the middle is called Shu, and he is the atmosphere. He is the middle between the sky and the ground, and then the ground is the ground god. And this is what is represented in this image. You will see this as well in many places. Now, the stool, even though you can have different stories, always is related to the afterlife or something to do with spirituality in a deep way. As you can see with the Asante, the golden stool, which was used as a seat for the soul. We can simply just read this from Wikipedia. Each stool is understood to be the seat of the owner's soul, and when not in use, it is placed against a wall so that the souls passing by may relax on it. The golden stool is the royal throne and must never touch the ground. Instead, it is placed on a blanket during inauguration. A new king is raised and lowered over the stool without touching it. The golden stool is carried to the king on a pillow, as only the Asantehina himself is allowed to handle it. During solemn occasions, the golden stool is placed on the king's left on a throne of its own. So you notice there the importance of this thing. So in the beginning, general stools that belong to normal people represent the soul or the spirit of the owner of it. So basically, each person had their own personal stool. And then there's the golden stool that belongs to the king of the Asante. Now, the reason why we have to mention these, and this is the Yaka of Congo headrest, the reason why these have to be mentioned is again because they are so important and so misunderstood or so not understood, and they show the literal interpretation of spirits. Even the word spirit is kind of weird because the spirit is more of an air, an atmosphere. They're literally saying that this thing that you see right here harbors the soul, and if you destroy it, that'll be bad for the owner. Not necessarily meaning that the person will die instantly, but it's almost like burning the Bible, or how some people don't want to swear in church, or they don't want to do anything weird in church like that. They'll do it outside of church, but not inside. So I'll finish by saying this one last thing because again, the excitement by the European discovery, which I'm excited, but not as excited and as curious as I am by who is this lady in this image? Why is she shown carrying the sky the way that Shu would be carrying the sky? Why is she holding that? Is she an old lady? Is she a young lady? What is the mythological aspect behind this? What is the depth of it? If someone was to make a almost like ancient Egyptian style breakdown of the mythology of Congo or the mythology of those people, as I will in later times, but again, those take a little longer to make. What exactly will you get back? What is the depth? What is the meaning? What is the reality behind all of these things? Rather than trying to connect ourselves to Celtics, to some degree, those Celtics, I mean, were they on much higher technological level than these people? Everything that we see that existed at the same time is about the same level as this.